School, Kolkata. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to today's knowledge sharing session on disruptive innovations in emerging markets, challenges, and ways forward. In today's fast paced world where change is the only constant, businesses are finding themselves at a crossroads: adapt or be left behind. Emerging markets, with their untapped potential and unique challenges, are becoming the proving grounds for transformative growth. At the heart of this revolution is what we call disruptive innovation, a force that not only reshapes industries but redefines the game's rules. In today's session, we'll cut through the buzzwords and get to the heart of what makes disruptive innovation truly matter. We'll try to explore how it works in the real world, especially in the resource limited markets, and uncover how markets turn obstacles into opportunities. After all, it's all about creating solutions that last and staying ahead in ways that leave a meaningful legacy. Now, time to introduce our distinguished speaker for the day. It is my distinct privilege to introduce Professor Shubhi Sen, Principal of NSHN Business School, Kolkata. Dr. Sen is a visionary leader and a distinguished academician whose career spans academia and industry. A graduate of St. Xavier's College, Kolkata, he holds an MBA in finance and a PhD in strategy. Dr. Sen began his career as an investment and business analyst with PwC and has received numerous accolades for his contributions, including the prestigious Best Young Teacher Award from IMA in 2010, a certified trainer in case-based pedagogy from ECCH London. He has consistently been at the forefront of fostering meaningful discussions on global issues. His leadership and expertise make him the ideal person to guide us through today's discussion on disruptive innovation. Sir, we are truly honored to have you here today. On behalf of the Association of Indian Management Schools, I warmly welcome you to this session, sir.
Thank you, Dr.
Before,
Nilanjana, once again.
thank you,
And
sir.
a welcome and a very formal good evening to all the participants and members of AIMS who are here with me today. So our topic for discussion today is disruptive innovations in emerging markets, challenges and ways forward. So today we are expected to have approximately a 1 hour duration of today's session, in which we will have a 45 minutes interactive session. And then in the last 15 minutes, we will open the house to questions and answers. So to start off with today's discussion, we need to understand.
Sir, I'll just interrupt a bit. There are certain announcements which we need to make to the participants. If you just allow me, can I have that done?
I think all the participants are already muted.
Yeah, with respect to the question answer, sir, I'll just request all the participants that the session, like sir said, is in the 1 hour. The last 15 minutes will be for question answer. If you have any questions during the session, please, rather than unmuting yourself, share them in the Zoom chat box and we'll address them during the Q&A session, right? And the session is also live streamed on the AIMS YouTube channel. So questions from the YouTube audience will be shared in the Zoom chat for Dr. Sen to address. Sir, over to you.
Thank you once again. So before we start off today's topic, there are two basic terms in management and business jargon that we are going to decode and decipher. One is disruptive innovations and the second is emerging markets. So these are the two terms we will try to understand in a little bit more detail with specific examples in the Indian context and what are the challenges and ways forward for Indian managers and business. So before we get into the term disruptive innovations, let us first try to understand what is innovation and how is innovation different from an invention. So from our childhood days, we have been very fond about inventions. We know about major inventors and what are the products they have invented. right from the early days of industrialization till today. So, an invention, by basic scientific definition, in simple English, it means coming up with something new. So, when the first fluorescent bulb came into being, Thomas Alva Edison was created as the inventor of the bulb, including the telephone. So that is what basically is an invention, coming up with something new. It could be a product, it could be a service, it could be an idea as well. Now, when you put this invention into an application, most importantly, carve out a business model out of it, then in management jargon, we call it an innovation. So typically, every innovation should be preceded by an invention. However, please note, every invention may not always result in an innovation. So to explain these two conjectures, I would come up with several live examples. So what is an innovation? You put a business model behind an invention. Now, what is a disruptive innovation? Or what is also a simple innovation? So, if the boundaries of that business innovation is limited to the current industry itself, we call it an innovation or a simple competitive innovation. However, if the boundaries of the innovation extends beyond the boundaries of the existing industry, we call it a disruptive innovation because it disrupts other businesses, other industries as well. So, innovation exists at multiple levels. So, before we come to that, let me explain to you how certain simple innovations has been carried forward as business innovations. So some of the recent innovations that comes to my mind is one of the inventions of a molecule by a scientist called Alan Scott sometime in the early 1950s. This molecule was invented by an European scientist and it was codenamed C12 at that point of time. Despite pursuing several decades of research on that C12 molecule, the scientists could not make much headway. And only in the 1990s did they sell off that invention, the patent of that molecule C12, to an American-Irish pharmaceutical giant known as Allegron. So Allegron started off using their research on this C12 molecule and find out that they had certain miraculous anti-aging properties. So really thereafter, they've named it Botox and made it a pharmaceutical and a cosmetic product and carved out $1 billion business out of it. So C12 molecule was basically an invention. However, when Allegron converted into a business model, it became an innovation. So there are several other examples too in the field of business and innovation, while in this case, an invention led to a successful innovation because the business story, the successful story of Botox as a $1 billion business, we already know about it. And till today, it might have carved out a revenue of more than $10 billion worldwide. However, there have been several instances of companies which has successfully carved out inventions, but never able to carve out a innovation by their own right. Several patents and inventions by Philips and Xerox Incorporation, other than the photocopier, which we know popularly of Xerox Incorporation, there were several patents and inventions by Philips and Xerox. One is an European or a Euro-Dutch MNC, another is a popular American MNC, which we popularly know. There were several patents and inventions by these two MNCs which never saw the light of the day. So in the case of Botox, the case of Allegran, we saw how a successful invention made out or paved the way for a successful innovation. However, we also saw several inventions by Philips or by Xerox, which never really saw the light of the day and nearly had a business model out of the same. So that helps us, gives us a bird's eye view of what is an invention and what is an innovation. And in the world of business, there are several success and failure stories revolving around invention and innovation. Now, before we get into disruptive innovations, let us understand the different levels in which innovation exists. Obviously, when we talk about disruptive innovations, we are talking about innovations at the highest level. Maybe one in a year, or maybe two or few in a decade, we have successful disruptive innovations. So one of the most simplest levels of a invention is what we call, or an innovation is what we call a redesigning. So in many cases, we find companies, to extend or stretch their product life cycle, they do smaller micro level or surface level changes, many a times in the packaging of the products, or simple redesigning of an existing product, and you innovate and carve out certain newer applications. Okay. A large number of such simple or redesigning level innovations we have seen in the packaging industry. So we see pharmaceutical companies packaging many of their formulations or liquids. Traditionally, they were packed in glass bottles. And in most cases, they were ambered color dark bottles. Because if the sunlight reaches the liquid at a high temperature, it might set off a photosynthetic reaction. And also, glass bottles were heavy, and also the breakages and damages were very, very high. And therefore, it was not quite suitable or costly for the pharmaceutical industry. So based on DuPont's invention of what is called PET, technically called polyethylene terephthalate, a new packaging material came into being in the 1990s. And glass slowly replaced PET bottles. PET bottles were much lighter, and therefore transportation costs came down significantly, improving the margins of the pharma players. And also breakage and demurrage was also much lesser, because plastics were by and large tamper or damage proof. So such innovations by a pharma company, keeping the basic process or the product intact, minor changes in the surface level factors like packaging, is basically what is called redesigning. So a redesigning is basically one of the most simplest levels of an innovation. Now, when we tamper or when we affect the major technology or the process of a product, the undergoing technology, we call it the second higher level of an innovation, call it re-engineering. So in the 100-year-old history of modern cars or vehicles, we have had cars which are typically run on fossil fuels, typically on diesel or on petrol. And then we came up with another fossil fuel, that is some sort of a compressed natural gas, or maybe even liquefied petroleum gas. So these vehicles in the earlier era, they were typically run on a technology of engines. Traditionally, till the 80s, they were run on engines which were carburetor based. Therefore, the mixing of the fuel, the air, and the water was done manually in the engine. What happened? These engines were very heavy. Traditionally, what we saw in a Hindustan Motors car known as the Ambassador, and also they were highly pollutants. So come the 1990s, we saw vehicles or cars undergoing a massive change in technology in the underlying process, how the engine is made. And we have what are called MPFI engines, or also called multi-point fuel injector machines. In such an engine, the mixing of the fuel, the water, and the air is done by a computer numerically controlled mechanism. So what happens? The engines becomes much lighter, and also the pollution levels in the emissions comes down significantly. So because of the engines becoming lighter, the mileage of the car improves significantly. And also from Euro 1 engines, in terms of meeting Euro 1 norms to Euro 2 norms, today we have cars which are very low on emission and which meets as high as Euro 6 emission laws. So this sort of an innovation from a carburetor-based engine to an MPFI-based engine is called a re-engineering. So this is a slightly more complex level of innovation. And also we have seen the way forward. Today we have EV cars, or what are called electric cars, which are run on batteries. So that is another major re-engineering and another slightly more complex level of innovation. However, none of these innovations, according to Clayton Christensen, who is the journalist or the management creator of this concept called disruptive innovation, though these are highly empathetic innovations, but in the true sense, none of them qualify as a disruptive innovation. So when I go back to my first example, so when pharma companies came up with the packaging material by replacing a glass bottle with a PET bottle, it affected the framework of competition only within the pharma industry. So a pharma company X affected the competition of a pharma company Y, or a pharma company Y affected the competition of a pharma company Z. Therefore, the boundaries and the horizons of competition was limited to the existing industry. The same was applied when we saw in the case of the automobile industry example as well. So when Japanese cars came in, we saw the birth of Maruti Suzuki, which changed the game plan of the existing industry only. So when Maruti Suzuki came with MPFI engines, it affected the existing players only within the automobile industry. So such cases of innovations are not truly called disruptive innovations. Then the question comes, what then is a disruptive innovation? So by definition, what Clayton Christensen says is that if the effects of the aftermath of innovation goes beyond the boundaries of an existing industry, then we disrupts the competition in other markets, and we truly call it a disruptive innovation. Now, one of the best examples that comes to all of us mind in today's context of a disruptive innovation, obviously there are many, is what we commonly use, or most of us use, is a smartphone. So till the 1990s, before the new telecom policy came into place, we had a few government players ruling the telecom industry, and we only had access to what is called a landline telephone to communicate between two people within a region. It might be within the city, it might be within the state, or it might be within the country as well. That was only our preferred means of communication. But with the new telecom policy and its several versions later, we saw the evolvement of mobile phones from the late 1990s onwards. And sometime around in the last 1 decade, we have seen the birth of mobile phones. Now, a mobile phone and innovation is something which has not only affected the competition in the telecom industry, but it has extended its disruption in various other industries as well. So in that true sense, a mobile phone or a smartphone that delivers everything in one single examples why I call it a disruptive innovation. So today, by using a smartphone, we have replaced several other products. Let us see how many. So in most of us case, if I'm traveling now, I don't use a professional camera or maybe even a plain digital camera. So my smartphone doubles up as a camera as well. I can shoot, I can take pictures, I can upload, I can store pictures, do whatever I like. I can even take a video recording. So it doubles up as a video recorder as well. And several other products that it has replaced. Right from the morning when I get up, I don't require an alarm. So it doubles up as a clock, a digital clock. It doubles up as an alarm device as well. When I go to work, I don't require a calculator, either a simple arithmetic calculator or even a scientific calculator. My smartphone has it all. Many of the functions of a computer, a basic computer, can be doubled up in a smartphone as well. Most of my applications and MS Office using Word, Excel, or PowerPoint can be opened, saved, edited, or transmitted using a smartphone as well. I can check my email also on my smartphone. And several other products that also comes to my mind. I can use it as a GPS navigator. I can use it as a compass. If I'm lost in a particular place, unable to locate the north or distinguish it from the south, I can use the compass and use it as a navigator. I can also use it as an app to reuse content or news. So it has substituted as a newspaper as well. So if we go through the browser of our smartphone, you can surely come across at least 20 to 30 products it has disrupted. So it has not only disrupted the market for telecommunications, it has disrupted the market for several other products, expanding the horizons of an existing industry. Therefore, this is what I call a disruptive innovation. What is a tangible outcome of a disruptive innovation? In traditional competition, if I have to outperform a product, I have to improve or increase the price. If I have to come up with a lesser product, I can reduce or come up with a cheaper price. But in a disruptive innovation, I get a better product, not necessarily at a higher price, but at a cheaper price. Now, how does this work? Initially, a smartphone was a very costly device. But today, a basic smartphone from a Chinese manufacturer can be available at maybe as low as 10 to 15,000 rupees. So once a company, obviously, when you create a disruptive innovation, companies invest a lot on CapEx and R&D. So it takes a lot of time, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years to break even. So once a company break evens, then the prices significantly comes down, the market explodes and penetrates not only that particular industry, but several other industries. So this is what is a truly a disruptive innovation is all about. And today, in the next phase, we are going to talk about whether such disruptive innovations can work in an emerging market like India or not. Over to you.
So very much agreeing with your points, and the examples were too simple enough to understand. What I just understand is like innovations, when we're talking about disruptive innovations, they are not confined to a specific market, right? In fact, they start in a niche market or maybe an underserved segment, and gradually they expand to the mainstream market. So that is what disruption we are
Yes,
talking about, right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Initially, it's a niche market, and then it gets along with the mass market through various examples of market penetration. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, sir. So, as we move forward, if we delve deeper into specific applications of disruptive innovations, and we talk about the bottom of the pyramid market, a very well known concept, we find that emerging markets are often considered fertile grounds for disruptive innovation. Yet, these markets come with their own sets of challenges. Now, in this context, I have a question to you that is, how can businesses effectively design and position disruptive innovation to meet the needs of these emerging markets?
Okay, surely. Thank you, Nilanjana, once again. So
Thank you,
now
sir.
we are going to discuss or take a little bit or more a peek view into whether such disruptive innovations are restricted only to the developed markets, or can we extend these disruptive innovations to emerging markets like India or other BRICS nations as well? So before we come to that, let us try to understand two another significant concepts. One is, what do we understand or mean by an emerging market? And second is, what is this concept of bottom of the pyramid? Both has been propounded by two major strategy gurus, C.K. Prahlad and Krishna Palepu from the Harvard Business School. So, C.K. Prahlad once gave a very interesting example of what is an example, and using an anecdote of what is an emerging market. So, till the 1990s, before the global markets opened up, in traditional economics, we had classified economics or economies into either as developed economies or developing economies or underdeveloped economies based on various parameters of purchasing power, poverty, income levels, per capita income, inflation, and the like. But with the global integration, which started off with China sometime around in the late 1970s and extended to several other countries, including India in 1991 and several other Southeast Asian markets, together clustered called the BRICS nations, a new term emerged, what is called an emerging market. So I will share the anecdote that I once heard from Professor C.K. Prahlad of what is a emerging market, and then I'll explain into the nuances of this term. So C.K. Prahlad himself says, if you land in a particular airport, in a particular city of a particular country, and from the airport, which is typically in today's context located about maybe 40 or 50 kilometers out of the city, and from the airport, if you are traveling towards the main city junction, if you can find out, if you can look out of the window of your car, you can gauge what sort of a nation it is. So he says, while traveling down the road from the airport, if you see a lot of high rises, multi-storied buildings, then undeniably it is a developing nation, or also called a developed market. The next he shared is that if you see a lot of poverty and shanties all around, poverty, dirt all around you, then undeniably this poverty-stricken country is a underdeveloped country. But if you see a combination of the two, that is a lot of shanties, a lot of poverty, as well as on the other side, a lot of construction work parallelly going on. A lot of high rises are already existing, and a lot of high rises, metro rails, bridges, flyovers, a lot of construction work is going on. Such an economy is strictly classified as an emerging market. So what by definition is an emerging market? It is typically a country which was an underdeveloped country, and it has opened up its gates through trade and commerce, trying to integrate its nation with the global market and trying to emerge from a developing nation to a developed nation is what we call an emerging market. So in an emerging market, what happens? Unlike in the developed markets, the product market, the labor market, the capital market is very, very underdeveloped. But at the same time, we see a lot of dynamism and activity going on, which cannot be explained in terms of a underdeveloped market. So it is developing, or here what we call it as an emerging market. Now, in this emerging market, which are typically, when I go by the BRICS classification, which is led by India and China, which accounts for maybe close to 2/3 of the world's population, or more than 50% of the world's population, both these two countries combined. So there is a significant population, if I compare it with a pyramid, at the bottom of the level. So if I segment a BRICS nation or an emerging market nation in terms of its income or purchasing power. Why income or purchasing power? Because that is one of the most important parameters a multinational enters a new market. Because if purchasing power is not there, an MNC would typically shy away. So purchasing power, income, or disposable income is one of the most important parameters a MNC usually uses to decide whether or not to enter a particular market, typically an emerging market. So if you segment emerging market in terms of its disposable income, if you take the super rich or the uber rich or the niche market at that point, where the income levels are very high, that accounts for not more than 1 or 2% of the population. So if you talk about India with a population of 140 crore, that market size would not exceed beyond 2 to 3 crores. So the people, the uber rich, the ultra luxury, where the majority of the income lies, that market, the market is huge in terms of disposable power, but in terms of population, the market is wafer thin. So majority of the luxury products or the high-end products. So if I have to talk about an iPhone, Apple would definitely target this market. If I have to talk about a luxury car maker like Mercedes or BMW or Audi, they would definitely love to tap this market because they would feel vibrant. This is where the market exists. But there is also another big market just below it. That is called the middle class or the middle segment of the population. So in 1994, McKinsey was one of the first to do a study in India, and they identified roughly around 30 to 40% in that time frame in 1994. They found out in their report that approximately 30 to 40% of the Indian population at that level was the middle class population, where the disposable income was not as high as of the super rich, but the disposable income was increasing very fast. And that MNCs or marketeers should target this population. So when we are talking about a middle class population of 40%, what is the market size that captures up to? So something around 50 to 60 crores. So we have a 2 to 3 crore, the Novu rich upper class population. We have another 50 to 60 crore, the middle class population, which today has burgeoned to maybe to 70 to 80 crore. But we are a country with a population of 140 crore. So still at the bottom of the pyramid, there is another 60 to 70 crore of the population where marketeers or MNCs believe that there is no purchasing power, and that in that segment, it is not worth or it is not viable enough to do business because that market is not attractive in terms of the margins that this market offers. But C.K. Prahlad, sometime around a decade or a little bit more back, came up with a pioneering concept where in emerging markets like India, he says, actually, there is a fortune waiting at the bottom of the pyramid. So when we are talking about the bottom of the pyramid, we are actually talking about this large base of population, something around 60 to 70 crore of the Indian population, which presumably does not have any disposable income. And he says, actually, you can carve out a business model in this market as well. So it is not only the uber middle, uber rich class where there is a market. It is the middle class that was pointed out by McKinsey, where he says that there is a perceivable business class model. But C.K. Prahlad also says in this bottom of the pyramid, there is also a possible business model that can be carved out. And I'll use another example of a case of another banking giant called Bandhan Bank, which actually carved out a business model using the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid. So over to you, Nilanjana, before I take it forward.
Thank you, sir. So the point which you said is absolutely right that the tier three or tier four set of customers, if we talk about the bottom of the pyramid, their percentage is obviously higher. But in fact, their consumption patterns have also changed. But despite the potential of disruptive innovation, we find that many initiatives fail due to the high operational cost and impractical market penetration requirements which are there. Because the requirement with respect to penetration, if they have to have attain the break even, has to be too deep enough. Now, critics argue that the low price, low margin, and high volume strategy, which is commonly associated with the bottom of the pyramid market, is unsustainable. Now, here I have a question to you, sir, is how can the businesses reconcile these challenges with the principle of disruptive innovation? And secondly, like what alternative strategies can be there which can drive both profitability and social impact in the sector?
Thank you, Nilanjana, once again. So before I come to your point, why profitability does not seem apparent in this bottom of the pyramid, but actually there are huge profits that can be actually made even at the bottom of the pyramid. So before I explain that numerics, let me come to the model of the Bandhan Bank once again. So going back, the founder of Bandhan Bank, which is the eighth largest commercial bank in terms of market capitalization today, which is ruled by some of the leading competitors from the public sector banks like the leading of State Bank of India, private sector banks like ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank, or even Axis Bank, or even some of the best of the class foreign banks or MNC banks like Citibank, or maybe HSBC, or Standard Chartered and the like. Here comes a small bank, a founder, Mr. Chandrasekhar Ghosh, who carved out a novel reach and became today the eighth largest bank in the country in terms of market capitalization, and how it converted an opportunity into a business model. So Mr. Chandrasekhar Ghosh initially started off. So we talked about one of the characteristics of emerging market is where the capital market, the product market, and the product market, labor market, and the capital market is very, very underdeveloped. Therefore, doing transactions in these markets are very, very costly. So typically what happens if I take the example of a money market or a capital market, in the emerging markets, like in India, before the bankers came into being, they were largely dominated in the unorganized sector by the money lenders, where the interest rates were phenomenally high. So it worked out something like this. These money lenders from the informal sector or the unorganized sector used to charge something around 1% or 2% interest on a compounded basis per day. So the small-time vegetable seller or a small-time fish seller or a small-time farmer usually went to the bankers. Instead of going to the bankers who did not have an access, they went to these money lenders to get their capital requirements, which charged a phenomenal rate. Now, at a glance, a 1% or a 2% compounded interest per day may not seem very high. But if I annualize this works out to more than maybe 1,000% per annum, compared against the lending rate of something between 12 to 14% by a leading banker. So because the capital market, the money market was underdeveloped, Mr. Chandrasekhar Ghosh, the founder of Bandhan Bank, then going back around 20 years back, he saw this as an opportunity. So in those days, getting a banking license for a small player like Bandhan Bank or Mr. Chandrasekhar Ghosh was very, very difficult. So he started off by forming an NBFC, what is typically known as a non-banking finance company. And he started lending typically to a women entrepreneur segment at an interest rate of something around 20 to 30%, which was slightly higher than the lending rate in the banking sector, but nevertheless was phenomenally less than what these unscrupulous moneylenders were charging. So this business saw the light of the day, and through the word of mouth, he made it a virtuous business cycle. And sometime in around 2008, when the Reserve Bank of India was issuing its third phase of banking license, where the house of Tata, it was being competed by the house of Tata, people like the Ambanis or the Aditya Birla Group. When none of them got the license, it was this relatively unknown player, by virtue of his efficiency, experience, and success rate, he was one of the privileged persons to get a banking license, topping the likes of the Tatas, the Ambanis, or the Birlas. And there came the foundation of the Bandhan Bank. It pegged its costs at much low. Usually, the private bankers, the operational costs are very, very high compared to even that of a multinational bank. So they pegged their operational costs much lesser. And now, instead of positioning it as an NBFC, they became a full-fledged banker and became the founding of Bandhan Bank. And using this disruptive model by offering a better product, not necessarily at a higher price, but at a much lesser price, he has been able to carve out a niche for itself. The penetration of Bandhan Bank today has disrupted not only the banking industry, but several other industries at the same time. So the model that has successfully worked, what you pointed out, Ninjanjala, yes, if you have to operate in the bottom of the pyramid, your margins will be wafer thin. So if the average margins, the profitability margins in a particular business, in a particular industry, let's say is 4%, if you have to penetrate into the bottom of the pyramid market, yes, your net profit margins has to come down because you'll have to penetrate that market with a much lesser cost. But your capital turnover rate will be much higher. So let's say I'll give you a simple example. So what matters at the end of the day is not your margins, is what you earn by way of your ROI or return on investment. And that return on investment is a product multiple of two ratios. One is the profitability margin, and the second is capital turnover ratio. So let's say a company having a net profit margin of 10% and a capital turnover ratio of 2, the ROI is 20%, which is the same as a company which has a net profit margin of 5% with a capital turnover ratio of 4. The ROI is the same, 20%. But here, if you have to operate in the BOP market, you'll have to scale down your profitability margins to maybe even 1%. Because if you have to penetrate the BOP market, your cost or prices has to be phenomenally low. So at that market, your margins will definitely be wafer thin, maybe 1%. But if you can enhance your efficiency, maybe 20 times or 40 times, your ROI can actually be 40%, which is much higher than what is prevailing in that particular industry. So while traditionally a BOP market is termed unattractive, CK Prahlad actually says is that there is actually a fortune that can be made at the bottom of the pyramid too. And it distinctly holds true in India and several other BRICS nations where similar other BOP models have worked out very, very successfully. Yes, over to you, Nilanjana.
Thank you, sir. So, but then I have one question here, that is with respect to the risk which is involved in the sector, right? Because if you talk about the distribution cost, if you talk about the logistics cost, the segment of people, their choice levels, and compared to the ROI, how feasible or how promising it is for companies to come up with disruptive innovations in this sector. Bandhan Bank is obviously one example, but then that is maybe one in a rare. So, like
Okay.
what, how promising it is actually for the other sectors.
So, so I'll explain that, and that will be the last session for today before we move on to the Q&A. Yes, if we look at a multi-diversified company, so if you recollect, when I started off with the theory on innovations, I talked about innovations at three levels. One at the most simplest level, which we call redesigning, then a slightly more advanced level, what we call re-engineering, and the most complex of all innovations is a disruptive innovation. So when we look at a multi-diversified conglomerate, let's say like Apple or the House of Tatas, you cannot commit all your entire investment on a disruptive innovations. Because disruptive innovations, as you've rightly said, involves a lot of risk. There are chances of a failure as well. So when you took a look at the overall picture of risk mitigation, yes, you need to innovate, because if you remain status quo, you will not survive the next decade. So you will have to innovate and continue to innovate. I remember going back sometime in the late 1990s, the year was perhaps 1998 or 1999, when the then publication house called the Business Today came up with a mega issue on study of the 50 biggest business families in India. And this was jointly done by in association with Harvard Business School, led by a leading strategic master called Michael E. Porter. And I still have a copy of that magazine myself, where the entire business portfolio of the 50 largest business families in India was assessed by Business Today in association with Harvard Business School. And one of the outcomes of this study was that 72, and this, mind you, is in the year 1998, 1999, when globalization had just kickstarted in India. It was about a decade or less than that. And they had predicted that 70 to 80% of the business families who were then thriving in 1998 would not survive the decade. And that has actually turned out to be the truth. Most of these thriving business families, which existed then, right from the Modis to the Thapars and to many of them, they have simply atrophied over time. The reason is very, very simple. You will have to innovate again and again and again. If you don't innovate, you won't survive. But if you innovate, success is not guaranteed, mind you. But status quo will lead you to oblivion. So when we are talking about innovation from a multi-conglomerate perspectives, obviously you cannot put in your entire R&D budget into a disruptive innovation, because that is too risky a proposition. So the basket would be something, obviously, majority of your investments you'll have to put in into a redesigning or re-engineering project, so that you ensure that your product life cycle keeps on moving and your cash flow keeps on going. And maybe 10 or 15% of your R&D budget you might allocate to a disruptive innovation. Obviously, maybe 1 in a 10 or maybe 2 in a 10 of a disruptive innovation will be successful. But if even 1 out of 10 succeeds, that is going to transform the company and going to make that company a mega giant. And just to end my session today, if many of you noted, when Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, when he visited Mumbai in sometime around April or May this year, he had already scheduled a charter of visits, which he had already pre-planned maybe months back. And amongst his charter of visits or appointment was Prime Minister Modi for sure. And also, before leaving for his flight in the evening, he had a meeting with some of these small time mechanics who work on Apple 5 phones in repairing and manufacturing in various of these local Chandni markets in Mumbai, which he met, trying to understand their point of view as well. So the bottom of the pyramid is a significant opportunity which cannot or can no longer be ignored. And successful disruptive innovations can actually be carried out, not only be restricted to developed countries alone, it can be replicated in emerging markets as well. So with this, over to you, Nilanjana, for any quick 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A, whatever the audience or the participants have, which you can collate for me to take it forward.
Yes, sir. So we have two questions from Dr. Villalar Art Ilango. I hope I have pronounced your name properly, sir. Sir's question is, firstly, what will be the time duration for the bottom level to become the middle level or to attain the standard of living? Firstly. And second question he has is, NPA will affect the ROI. So how to overcome that?
Okay, so let me answer two questions. First of all, if I've understood you correctly, you are talking about how long will be the time for this bottom of the pyramid to become the middle class population. Okay.
Right.
This is a very complex economical question, but I'll give you a more business answer to this question. So let's say in a traditional project, a business project where a capex, let's say in a telecom industry, where the gestation or the break even is one of the highest, it might take even 10 years, 12 years, or even 15 years to gestate or maybe to even break even. But when you're talking about a disruptive innovation where the capex could be in billions of dollars and your margins are wafer thin, obviously, yes, your break even will be much longer compared to what any other traditional manufacturing project would be. That's for sure. So going by that simple extrapolation, obviously, it will take time for the bottom of the pyramid to scale up to the middle class population. But having an exact arithmetical estimate of the same seems very difficult at that say. But let me give you another example for that to justify from another point of view. In 1998 or sometime around 1999, when the new telecom policy was announced, the country's population, means India's population at that point of time, was something around 110 to 115 crore. And the penetration of the telecom market in India, because smartphones or mobile phones were not there at that point of time, we only had access to landline telephones. And therefore, the penetration at that point of, if I remember correctly, was less than 1%. So only 1 crore of the population had connected to telecommunications or a means to communicate from one part of the nation to another part. But mind you today, sir, we never expected that within 2 or 2.5 decades, that penetration today is something around 70 to 80%. So the bottom of the pyramid has definitely scaled up. Maybe it has taken 20 years, but at least that penetration has happened. And I'll give you another quick example where the bottom of the pyramid has scaled up to the middle class level. When the current government introduced digital payments during the lockdown phase, what we typically call as the UPI interface or United Payments Interface, nobody thought that a country like India, where digital penetration is very low, where awareness towards digital products is very, very low, where digital payments would penetrate even the remotest corner of the country so fast in a span of 5 to 6 years was unbelievable. Today, if you go into the remotest corner of the country, maybe a tier 4 or maybe even a tier 5 time, and go to a retail vegetable shop, even he will have a QR code where you can do a transaction digitally. So the bottom of the pyramid is coming up fast, and it will come up faster than what we have seen before. But how fast it will become the middle class? is a difficult question to answer, at least at that stage, but it is accelerating very, very fast. And the second question is, if the profitability margins in the BOP market is low, obviously you will have to enhance your efficiency levels much higher than the industry benchmark to capitalize on the capital turnover ratio. So while your profitability ratio will be less, you will have to capitalize on your profitability turnover ratio at a much higher pace than the industry benchmark to make your business model successful. Several companies in BRICS nations have done it, and I think there are a lot of case studies, including the Bandhan Bank, which has become the 8th largest bank today in the country, has shown that it is a distinct possibility. Thank you. Over to you, Nilanjana.
Thank you, sir. So we have the second question is from Mr. Abhishek Kumar Dev. He says, Sir, you talked about distracting innovation with an example of mobile having eaten at many markets can be seen as a positive way. I think this is a feedback he has given rather than a question. We next move to the question by Mr. Vinod Jaiswal. He
Let
is
me just
from,
take on that question. So I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question correctly. Yes, whenever there is a disruptive innovation, there is a sense of negative thinking because it also kills competition in several other industries. So the question might be, I'm not sure whether I'm addressing it currently, is what is the positive side of disruptive innovation? So if you go back to the 1980s in the scenario in West Bengal where I stay and where I professionally operate, the then left front government strictly opposed the computerization or the computer movement in the several public sector banks then, expecting that if computerization enters the banking industry, it will lead to a lot of unemployment or attrition in the banking industry because machines will be replacing labor. But mind you today, sir, while machines have replaced labor in the banking industry, several new industries have also evolved. The IT industry is today the third or the fourth largest industry in India today. So while there is an offset of labor in the form of unemployment in one industry as a result of disruptive innovation, there are several other industries which will also grow. If you look at disruptive innovation in the smartphone or mobile phone market, yes, obviously, we don't read a newspaper today. I would love to read a TOI in my mobile. So it kills the publishing industry. But today, mind you, the mobile phones and several other business is $1 billion business. So one industry going away and one industry evolving is the laws of nature. While businesses need to adapt, we also need to adapt and move on. And that is the laws of nature. It is survival of the fittest if we want to survive. Over to you, Nilanjana.
thank you, sir. So this is the final question from Mr. Vinod Jaiswal. He's from Aditya Institute of Mumbai. He says this, sir, I have a question related to quick commerce. How can local businesses adapt and remain competitive when a financially dominant companies introduce innovations like quick commerce, which is often leverages scale, technology, and extensive funding?
Okay, so when you are talking, I'm not sure whether I'll be able to address your question correctly. You'll find today, sir, a lot of these startups are addressing this quick commerce segment. So what actually happens? Yes, I administer the muscle power, the penetration pricing, the deep reserves of these large multinational that we have that may kill competition or may buy out competition to favor the local players. Yes, all startups may not see light at the end of the day. Some startups, despite being a successful innovation, despite being a disruptive innovation, may become bought out by a big MNC. And that is actually, again, based on the laws of nature. It is the fittest that will survive.
Right, sir. So, with that, we come to the end of today's session. Just to conclude, whatever we had a discussion in the last 1 hour, disruptive innovation is challenging to implement, no doubt, and does not immediately resonate with mainstream customers. It is a gradual process that requires time and persistence. Due to its complexity, yes, we find that many organizations they prefer to focus on sustaining innovations which builds on existing markets and customer bases. However, disruptive innovations often emerge from low-end markets or entirely new markets. So this presents significant opportunities within the bottom of the pyramid segment as it offers a fertile ground for creating innovative solutions tailored to underserved or the untapped populations. So, Dr. Sen, your insights today has been incredibly enlightening and thought-provoking. On behalf of the Association of Indian Management Schools, I sincerely appreciate the depth of knowledge and expertise you have shared with us. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank Mr. Sudhir Sharma, President of AIMS, for his leadership and vision, as well as all the esteemed board members of AIMS for their continued guidance. A special thanks to the AIMS Secretariat for their meticulous organization and support in making the session a success. Finally, my heartfelt gratitude to all the participants for your engagement and enthusiasm throughout the session. Your presence and active participation are what makes such discussions impactful and meaningful. With that, we conclude today's session. I hope you all have filled up the feedback form. Sir, there's one last question from Dr. Vella. Can we take that?
Yeah, let's see.
Okay. Sir's question is, industry can overcome the NPA by increasing the productivity and reducing the overhead, whereas in banks, without increasing the interest rate, how to overcome?
Okay, so if you talk about specific to the banking industry, sometimes I'll put it very, very general, Mr. What is his name? Professor? Anything?
Vellala,
Where? Okay.
Dr.
So
Vellala.
sometimes what actually, when you talk about the banking industry, yes, without your interest rates, when you're talking about the lending rate, yes, it is constant. When you're talking about the deposit rate, yes, also they are constant because you are operating in a very structured and a very, let's say, a very matured industry. But what you can keep is your operational costs much lesser than that of the other leading players. So if you see at least one of the major structures of the cost structure of the Bandhan Bank, it is definitely much lesser than some of the leading banks, definitely in the multinational banks, definitely also in the case of the other private banks, where the cost structures in terms of the banking industry is significantly higher. So when you talk about the operating costs, the two major costs are the rental costs and the salary cost. So if you see the salary structure in Bandhan Bank, it is one notch lesser than that of the private bank. So the salary cost becomes slightly lesser. And also where the branches of the Bandhan Bank are located are also slightly outside the main city limits, not in the main hub of the city. So they save a little bit on the rental costs as well. So by reducing their operational costs slightly, they make out a little bit more on operational margins. And also they offset this by keeping the deposit rates a little higher than the traditional private players. So they are able to attract clients, and they also keep the lending rates slightly lesser, maybe by 50 basis points on an average, which makes the lending also slightly attractive. So the loss that they make by keeping the deposit rates high and lending rates low is basically offset by keeping their operational costs slightly lesser. And at the same time, they are being profitable as well. So this is somewhat a layman's point of view without going into the nuances of the balance sheet of the banking major. Yes, over to you, Nilanjana.
Thank you so much, sir. I hope your question gets addressed, sir, with this. And with that, we conclude today's session, wishing all of you a very wonderful evening ahead. So thank you.
Thank you from behalf of AIMS and NSHM Business School. I thank you all for joining me and Nilanjana for this session on disruptive innovation in emerging markets, challenges, and way forward. Thank you once again.